Some queens were remembered for beauty. Some were remembered for wisdom. But a few were remembered because people were afraid to even whisper their names. Across history, queens were often expected to smile, marry well, produce heirs, and stay behind the curtain. But some women refused to stay there. They stepped into courts filled with betrayal, family plots, religious wars, assassins, and empires on the edge of collapse. And when they took power, they did not always rule gently. Some became brilliant leaders. Some became survivors. Some became legends so dark that historians are still arguing about what was real, what was propaganda, and what was too terrifying to forget. This is not just a list of evil queens. This is a journey through the women who proved that a crown could be beautiful, heavy, and dangerous all at once. And the first story begins in ancient Egypt, with a queen who may not have existed at all, but whose revenge became impossible to erase. Nitocris of Egypt, the queen of the flooded banquet. Long before Rome, before medieval castles, before European queens fought for thrones, there was the strange legend of Nitocris of Egypt. Her story comes from ancient sources, and even today, historians debate whether she was a real ruler, a confused memory, or a name created by mistake. But that uncertainty makes her legend even more haunting. According to the tale, Nitocris lived near the end of Egypt's Old Kingdom, around 2184 BC. Her brother, the rightful pharaoh, was betrayed and killed by members of his own court. Nitocris inherited a kingdom full of smiling enemies. So she waited. She did not strike in the streets. She did not start a war. Instead, she invited the men responsible to a grand banquet in an underground chamber. They believed they were being honored. They sat down, ate, drank, and relaxed. Then the chamber began to fill with water. The story says Nitocris opened hidden floodgates and turned celebration into judgment. Afterward, she ended her own life before anyone could punish her. Maybe it happened. Maybe it did not. But her legend survived because it captured something ancient and powerful. The fear of a patient ruler with nothing left to lose. But her story was only the beginning. Far to the east, another woman would rise from almost nothing and become the only female emperor in Chinese history. Wu Zetian, the concubine who became emperor. Wu Zetian began inside the Tang imperial court as a low-ranking concubine. In that world, women were supposed to compete quietly for attention, not command an empire. Wu did the impossible. Through intelligence, strategy, and ruthless court politics, she climbed higher than any woman in Chinese imperial history. By 690 AD, she ruled as emperor in her own name, founding the Zhou dynasty. But the path to the throne was filled with dark accusations. Traditional histories claim she removed rivals, destroyed powerful families, and used secret officials to monitor enemies across the empire. One of the most infamous stories claims she framed Empress Wang in a palace scandal to clear her own path to power. Whether every detail is true or shaped by hostile historians, Wu's reputation became terrifying. And yet, she was not simply a villain. She also strengthened the government, promoted talented officials, supported Buddhism, and challenged aristocratic families that had controlled power for generations. That is what makes Wu Zetian so fascinating. She was capable of building a stronger state and destroying anyone who stood in her way. In another life, she might have been remembered only as a genius ruler. Instead, history remembers her as both brilliant and dangerous. And across the world, another queen was learning that survival in a royal family could be just as deadly as war. Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt. Cleopatra VII is often remembered as a seductress. But that image is far too simple. She was the last active ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt, a multilingual queen, a political strategist, and one of the most skilled survivors of the ancient world. She ruled in a time when Rome was swallowing the Mediterranean, and Egypt was too rich to be ignored. Cleopatra understood power better than most kings around her. She formed an alliance with Julius Caesar. Later, she tied her future to Mark Antony. These relationships were not just romances. They were political weapons in a world controlled by Roman men. But Cleopatra's own family was also a battlefield. Her brother and co-ruler Ptolemy XIII became her enemy. Her sister Arsinoe challenged her claim. In that dynasty, family loyalty often ended the moment a throne appeared between relatives. Cleopatra protected her crown with cold precision. When Octavian finally defeated Antony and Cleopatra, he wanted to display her in Rome as a living trophy. Cleopatra refused to become someone else's victory parade. In 30 BC, she chose death instead of humiliation. Her name survived not because she was simply beautiful, but because she understood the stage of power better than almost anyone. But Rome had its own queen without a crown, and she would become one of the most feared mothers in imperial history. Agrippina the Younger, the mother behind Nero. Agrippina the Younger lived at the center of Rome's most dangerous family. She was connected to emperors by blood, marriage, and ambition. She was the sister of Caligula, the wife of Claudius, and the mother of Nero. In Rome, that meant she was never far from power, but also never far from danger. Agrippina wanted her son on the throne. She married Emperor Claudius, pushed him to adopt Nero, and positioned her child ahead of Claudius's biological son. Ancient writers later claimed Claudius died after being poisoned, and many pointed to Agrippina as the mind behind it. Once Nero became emperor, Agrippina expected influence. But power does not like to share a room. Nero slowly turned against his mother. She had helped create the emperor, but now the emperor saw her as a threat. In 59 AD, Agrippina was killed on Nero's orders. Her story feels almost like a Roman warning. If you build a monster to protect your power, one day it may look back at you. And this is where the story becomes even stranger, because the next ruler did not just remove a rival. She turned against her own son, Empress Irene of Byzantium, the mother who took the throne. In Byzantium, power was sacred, theatrical, and deadly. Empress Irene first ruled as regent for her young son, Constantine VI. At first, she seemed to be protecting his throne. But over time, mother and son became rivals inside the same palace. Irene wanted authority. Constantine wanted to rule without her shadow over him. Their conflict ended in one of Byzantine history's darkest family betrayals. In 797 AD, Irene had her son blinded and removed from power. After that, she ruled alone, using the imperial title in a way no Byzantine woman had before. She was not just an empress beside a man. She was the ruler. But her victory came at a cost. Her actions shocked the empire and gave the Pope in Rome a reason to crown Charlemagne as emperor in the West in 800 AD. That moment helped split the idea of Roman imperial authority between East and West. Irene won the throne, but she weakened the world around it. Yet, another queen would show that power could be terrifying not only in palaces, but in the name of faith. Isabella of Castile, the queen of empire and expulsion. Isabella of Castile helped shape the modern world. She and Ferdinand completed the Reconquista, united powerful Spanish kingdoms, and sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. To many, she became a symbol of national strength and religious devotion. But behind that legacy was a much darker side. In 1492, Isabella supported the Alhambra Decree, forcing Jewish communities in Spain to convert or leave. Families that had lived on the Iberian Peninsula for centuries suddenly faced exile, separation, or suspicion. She also supported the Spanish Inquisition, a religious court that targeted people accused of secretly practicing forbidden faiths. To Isabella, these actions were part of a divine mission. That is what makes her story so chilling. Her harshest policies were not random acts of anger. They were organized, signed, recorded, and carried out as duty. Isabella helped build an empire, but for many people under her rule, that empire arrived with fear. And in England, another queen would also try to restore faith through fire and punishment. Mary I of England, the queen history called Bloody Mary. Mary I became England's first queen regnant in 1553. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and her life had been shaped by humiliation, religious conflict, and political danger. When she finally took the throne, she believed she had a sacred mission: restore Catholicism after years of Protestant reform. But her mission became her curse. Under Mary, hundreds of Protestants were executed for heresy. The public punishments were meant to frighten people back into religious obedience. Instead, they created martyrs. Mary also ordered the execution of Lady Jane Grey, the young Protestant claimant who had briefly been placed on the throne before Mary took power. By the time Mary died in 1558, her dream of restoring Catholic England had failed. Her half-sister Elizabeth inherited the crown, and Mary's enemies shaped her memory for centuries. The nickname Bloody Mary became stronger than the woman herself. But the next queen did not rule England. She ruled from behind the curtains of France, and her enemies called her the Black Queen. Catherine de' Medici, the Black Queen of France. Catherine de' Medici was not born French. She came from the powerful Medici family of Italy and married into the French royal house. For years, she seemed trapped at court, overshadowed by her husband and ignored by those who doubted her. But after King Henry II died, Catherine became one of the most important political figures in France. She guided 3 of her sons through the throne during a time of religious civil war between Catholics and Huguenot Protestants. Her most infamous association is the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, when violence exploded in Paris and spread across France. Historians still debate how directly Catherine planned the event, but her name has remained tied to it for centuries. To some, she was a cold manipulator. To others, she was a desperate mother trying to keep France from tearing itself apart. That is the uncomfortable part of Catherine's story. She may have believed every ruthless choice was necessary, but necessity in royal politics can become a dangerous excuse. And finally, we come to a queen whose island kingdom feared her, resisted her, and still could not remove her. Ranavalona I of Madagascar, the queen who defied the world. Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar from 1828 to 1861. European visitors often described her as cruel, unstable, and impossible to control. But those descriptions came from outsiders who were furious that she refused their influence. Ranavalona expelled missionaries, restricted foreign power, and fought to keep Madagascar independent. She saw Christianity and European trade as threats to her kingdom's identity and sovereignty. But her rule was also harsh. Forced labor, severe punishments, and political purges marked her reign. Communities suffered under the weight of state projects and military demands. Her policies left deep scars, and historians still debate the scale of the damage. To her enemies, she was a tyrant. To some of her supporters, she was the ruler who kept Madagascar from becoming another conquered territory. That contradiction is why Ranavalona remains so difficult to explain. She was both a defender of independence and a ruler remembered for fear. Her reign reminds us that history's darkest figures are rarely simple. Sometimes they are born from invasion, pressure, paranoia, and the terrifying belief that survival justifies almost anything. So were these queens truly evil? Or were some of them shaped by worlds where weakness could mean exile, imprisonment, or death? The answer depends on who is telling the story. Nitocris became a legend of revenge. Wu Zetian became a symbol of forbidden ambition. Cleopatra turned politics into performance. Agrippina tried to rule through her son. Irene took power from her own child. Isabella and Mary used faith as a weapon of rule. Catherine tried to hold France together through fear. Ranavalona resisted foreign influence with an iron hand. Some were brilliant, some were brutal, many were both, and maybe that is why their stories survived. Not because they were easy to understand, but because they force us to ask a question history never fully answers. When a queen becomes terrifying, is it because she was born that way, or because the crown demanded it? Tell me in the comments which queen you think history judged too harshly, and which one deserves her dark reputation the most. And if you want more dark history told simply, subscribe for the next animated documentary.